Alrighty. Hello there. I am Chris from Airwindows, and this is going to be something of an unusual coding day, and I'll tell you why. Because my video switcher busted, so I can't show my screen this time. And that's a bit of a downer when the point is being able to share what you're doing on the screen. But one thing that I can do is play audio of what I'm working on. So I'm just going to take a moment and edit some of these blank spaces out of the thing I'm working with. Clear the markers and resave it. This also might be a fine time for me to answer questions of people, but it's going to be a little different. Like, I'm not even putting this into the playlist for the coding streams, because unfortunately the way things are going, you can't see what it is that I'm doing. I have no way of doing it other than maybe holding up the laptop in front of the camera, but that would be silly. For all I know, nobody actually cares about looking at the code. But that's what I'm trying to get out onto the internet. So I'm also going to take a minute and shuffle around my windows a bit, because I'm getting the same thing of staring off at the side at my own face on the screen, which is always terribly distracting. I don't want to have that happening. So, and I have good news. We're not going to get a distorty sound this time, because I solved what was causing the distorted microphone sound last week. And the patch bay that I spent days trying to set up, which had the microphone's preamp output hooked through into synthesizer, that's been unhooked now. So you know what, I'm going to scooch this window over here, and I should be able to focus now, hopefully. So the order of the day is I need to make ZNotch. Hey Bo, hey Aiden, hey Jazz. Because ZNotch is going to be the equivalent of this. And what you're hearing there is basically just the same thing as all the other ones were. But it's called phaser, and it's a notch filter. I hope I'm doing well, thank you. Doing reasonably well. Ever since I got super sick last year, I'm always just sort of, but we hang in there anywho. And my first order of business, and my screen here on the laptop is actually slightly better because it's not being rescaled. Here's the deal, is when I was doing the ATEM Mini, and actually I have a thing, check this out. I am doing all kinds of things for replacing it and making it not die this time. So this should hold me until I have more. And it is a big heavy piece of sheet aluminum that I've bent and folded in such a way that the bottom surface of the ATEM, which gets quite hot even though it's not actually a heatsink itself, should rest on this. This is a 1/16 of an inch thick. It's not a great heatsink, but it will conduct heat to some extent. And when I get the replacement heatsink, when I get the replacement ATEM, I've also got a variety of other stuff. in mind for like less than $100 combined that'll be a much more effective way of doing that. For instance, this cheap laptop stand it's aluminum, but it's actually tiny, and it's a little bigger than the ATEM, and I think it would be very uncool for a real laptop. But fortunately, working with the ATEM, you could set it over the sort of fan area in the middle of it, and I believe I can park the bottom part of that laptop cooling stand underneath my Lavery converters, and it'll fit. So that means there will be a raised aluminum area for the ATEM to sit on, so there's a little cooling space, and there's a fan built into it, which I'm going to have to plug into there's some kind of plugging it into power that you can do, and I'll be looking into doing that. I think there's also more USB connections that you can get out of this particular one. And I also ordered a heatsink that's about the size of the ATEM Mini. And it's just a sort of little flat heatsink with a bunch of little spikes going off of it. It's for power amplifiers or something. And not terribly expensive, so I got one. And I got some thermal pads. And I'm going to put the thermal pads on this heatsink, sit the replacement ATEM onto the top surface of the thermal pads, because the ATEM has these little rubber feet. And part of what I need to do is at all costs not take apart or modify or disassemble the replacement, because I think there's a good chance that it's going to blow up too. And I need it to be totally untouched so that I can send it in for replacement. Because if it dies within the warranty, I should be able to get a replacement one. The reason I think it might do that is that I believe I figured out what killed the first one. For extended periods of time, and you'll notice that this was happening at first when I was running the laptop. Well, the way I've got everything hooked up, it's hooked up to sort of hit any button and be ready to go. Like all the inputs are ready except for the second camera. Everything is based on the first camera. What you're seeing right now is a wider angle lens, because in order to get the camera to run into my capture thingy, I have to crop in the sensor space to 1920 by 1080. Otherwise, it absolutely won't work, which changes the field of view of all of my lenses and stuff, so I have to adjust for that. Fortunately, I could. And I have no capacity to adjust the color correction, so my look in these videos until I get this fixed is all askew. My lighting isn't really good enough to support this without fixing it in post-processing. And when I've got this stuff running into the ATEM, before it blew up and died, that can talk to the cameras, so I can set the cameras up with color correction and everything, and that's fine. I believe that's being done in cameras, unless it's being done in the ATEM, which is possible. And then, since the camera is a high-resolution camera going into the ATEM, which can composite that stuff at the high res, and then downsample it to 1080p for getting captured in again, that is capturing at super high res and then rescaling. Well, the laptop going in doesn't come in at the same resolution as the camera is. So for the laptop to be visible at all, you probably remember the little black bars on the side of it. That has to be rescaled. But wait, there's more. I have this little Sleepy Circuits Hypno. It's the sort of color bar special effects thingy that I often like to do. And that composites really well in the ATEM. Unfortunately, that's yet another scaling factor, because that's coming in at not even 1080p. Like, the laptop is one resolution. I'm thinking the laptop will switch over to 1280 by 720, if I'm not mistaken, to go into the ATEM, because the ATEM won't take it in at 1440 by 900, and the laptop won't go all the way to 1080p. So the laptop gets scaled up to the size of the camera. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Slippy Circuits Hypno, even if I'm not using it, is also getting scaled up to 1080p. And then the switcher does whatever compositing I want to do with it, including green screening, all that kind of stuff. And then it gets downscaled again to 1080p, meaning that if I'm doing the green screening, it looks gorgeous. It looks absolutely beautiful. I have the best color correction. It's all like DaVinci Resolve color correction. And the green screening stuff is being done at the native camera resolution, even though none of the sources for it can really do that. But they're all being scaled up, but they're both being scaled up simultaneously from different sizes. Then all the compositing is happening at the big scale, and then it gets scaled back down again to go into the computer. So basically, I've been burning up these ATEM minis like nuclear fusion. And it's surprising how long that worked. It worked for kind of a long time, and I got a lot of cool use out of it, and I'm really happy with how it looked. But I feel like I know why my video compositor melted. Basically, even without having sat it on top of a DAC, a digital to analog converter, which generates heat itself, and even without running it during a heat wave in a room that doesn't have air conditioning, the stuff I was asking it to do was also too much. And I'm not sure whether maybe its little fan gave up at some point. Oh, I'm talking about the no screen view. We're not going to be able to have a screen view until I get a replacement ATEM. So I'm going to do my plugin coding anyhow, or at least if I'm not, then we'll talk this entire time and I'll do the plugin coding later. And you'll be able to hear stuff that I experiment with. And I can't use a secondary laptop to process the screen while coding on the other, because my way of capturing into the computer, there's just unfortunately no way of doing it. I tried various things. I also tried plugging the laptop's HDMI output into the video capture so that you'd have no camera, but a laptop feed, and it would not do it. The Razer that I'm using to capture only will take in 1080p at 60 frames per second, by the way. And that thing is reliable as hell, but it is also not very adaptable. And I tried breaking out my old Thunderbolt Blackmagic converter, which wasn't quite as fancy as the ATEM. Unfortunately, that did no good at all. I'm not going to have a Z region. X region was more of an experiment, so that would be more along the lines of Y filters. There is no analogous plugin in the sampler. But yeah, pretty much today is likely to be not all that interesting in some ways. I wonder if I can build this. Maybe not so much, but we'll see. So I'll keep an eye on your chat, and this is my talk to the camera day, I guess. And first things first, let's start making this happen. So I'm going to want to open up Z low pass and copy a bunch of stuff from that. The creator code for Notch seems to be fine. I'm going to want everything to be copied from ZLowPass, but we're using a different, it's the same deal as before. We take everything from the closest we can get in previous versions, use the new biquad type, and then dial in all the controls to act like the controls on the sampler did. And we'll start with a bunch of labels for things. .5. I think param3 was 1. I'm not really sure. And param4 will be 0.5 again. And then we'll blank out some of these spare things. I gotta say, if I get into my creative zone, it's going to be even more challenging because you won't even be able to see mysterious and cryptic code, and I'll also be talking a lot of bollocks. So, go figure. And I gotta get these variables in here. If I do this right, I'll get something that works. There's our C file. I need to cover reset. That'll blank out our things. I may or may not be able to keep as close an eye on chat. Probably give it a try anyhow. And ZNotch does not even have the notch code in it, so we're just gonna go directly from low-pass code, which probably also means I can test it and see if it works, and then update it. Seeing as it will start out as a clone of the low-pass. By the way, somebody asked on, I think it was a Dogs and Acid forum, it is very likely that the Surge synthesizer folks are going to build this into Surge, but not just as a plugin. Surge has special dedicated filters that can operate on a note-by-note basis. So you can have polyphonic notes, whereas if it was a filter, you couldn't. And so the folks in Surge are interested in taking these and doing a Surgified version of them that will give the same sound, or basically the same sound, possibly even closer to the real sampler than mine is, because mine's running long word lengths, and Surge runs everything at 32 bits. So it's possible that their emu sounding samplers might sound even more emu-like than mine do. But the point of them doing that, hopefully it'll work out fairly well, and it won't be too much trouble for them, is to be able to make these filters operate on envelopes on a note-by-note basis, not just an overall sound basis. And that should be cool as anything. Although some of the usefulness of the filters is when you have a more complicated sound rather than just a single wave. But, you know, you can do what you like. Low pass zip, unpacking it, retro. Yes, retro has been part of all of this stuff for some time now. What it means is the old audio unit, the old Mac VST, and the 32-bit Windows. Now, the old audio unit does include 64-bit, but it also includes 32-bit and PPC. And the new audio unit, the signed one, is Intel 64-bit and M1. And a lot of times if you're using a newer audio unit, especially on a new version of the operating system, you want to use the signed one. But the retro audio unit does have 64-bit. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the retro VST should probably also have 64-bit. So it's not only 32-bit plugins, but it's the stuff that's built on this antique laptop that I have here, and built on a very old operating system. And so if people have difficulty with that kind of stuff, then that's why I did newer versions of it as well. So let's see, I probably have this ready to go. It does say succeeded, so that may be it as far as that's concerned. Let's go and grab the, you did just build, didn't you? There you go. It says created at 11:32 a.m., but that's clearly not true. We will see whether we have anything. This is a good day for asking me questions, guys, because I can't focus too hard on talking about the code because you can't see it. So it'll come back. I'm spending not a small amount of money to be able to make it come back, but for now, we're in this zone where this is just what we got. So what do we got? We've got the low pass. This is meant to be Notch, but we don't have Notch code yet. Although one of the handy things is, since I've been using the same code for all the biquad filters, it's possible that I'll get there just by changing part of the code, at which point we might not have a super long day today, unless you have stuff to talk about, which would be fine. But we've got some adjustments to make here. Let's open another plugin folder. Let's open, oh, I know something that will show me the correct thing. I made an ZNotch. I should be able to get the relevant information out of there, and nothing else will have changed. So if I scroll down here, don't fool with any of this other stuff, but change this formula. And I can leave the bandwidth at Butterworth, although I'm probably going to have to adjust that. You asked me about the whole plugin? Yeah. Didn't you ask me if I used FFT or something else? I didn't use FFT. I haven't got that in the toolkit yet. When I do, I wouldn't be using that for a filter that's supposed to sound nice, because I don't think FFT does sound nice. But there would be things to use it for. It just wouldn't be that. Let's see now. I see the way in which the notch filter looks different from the other filter. I've got my biquad A handy here. And these are the bits that I would be changing. So I'm having an eye to see whether I spot anything else that I would need to change, but I think that was about it. I'll close ZNotch after having taken that out of it. Build the new plugin, drag it over so that you can hear it as quickly as possible, because I can't show you anything, but you can hear what I'm doing. And let's see if this now sounds like a low pass or whether it sounds like a notch filter. That sounds like a notch filter. Cool. Okay, what were you asking me about then? Hole. I am making a little progress with this. Hang on, let me look. I don't see why I can't just look. I'm going to need to fool with some of this stuff anyhow, which means putting it on control so that I can fiddle with them. I'm going to take half a moment, jump back in there, and just set all of the knobs I'm not using to 0.5 or something. For the obvious reason that it's going to remember my settings, and then if I tell it to use some of these new controls, I can tell them to be like 0.7071. But if I have an algorithm that blows up, if the setting is 0 and I have the slider set to 0, then the program will be starting up with the slider set to 0 before I can get to it and change it. And since that could make it crash, I'm going to make everything default to a more intermediate stage. And we've done that. And now let's have a look at Hull. I'll tell you. It's also on my GitHub if you want to follow along. Hull specifically? Yep. Let's have a look. I don't see anything that suggests that it's an FIR. Wait, hang on. You're talking about Hull, not Holt. Hull is made out of averages. You can't make a Hull with IIR filters. You made something else, which is fine. Go ahead and make something else. That's not Hull. Hull is a very clearly defined thing, at least the guy that gave his name to it. This is spelling out as a way of analysis. And if you take away the comb filtering, you're also changing other things about it. That's the thing. Comb filtering is not necessarily a problem. If you record things with multiple microphones, you're automatically getting comb filtering. If you have stuff in a room, you automatically get comb filtering. Our ears hear through comb filtering, and comb filtering is part of what makes reverbs be what they are. So it's a matter of, does the thing have the sound that you want or not, rather than let's do the right thing by always removing comb filtering. It's not necessarily what you want. Constellation 33X, look into my 2-vinyl plugin. Several things about that. There's also Grooveware and Crunchy Grooveware. And acceleration, which is acceleration limiter for transients. That one's a little challenging because it's such a good acceleration limiter that if it's being used properly, you can't really hear it happening. I've got quite a bit of vinyl-y type stuff. But yeah, the Hull is FIR filters. Hull is averages defined in a particular way. So it will always have comb filterings. Let's close hull again and go back to ZNotch because we need to get some of these parameters going. Such as our Q is now parameter 5. And I'm going to make a little note of that while I'm there. And I think I might jump right in and see where I get with that. Although I am wondering whether maybe I need to immediately start dialing back the limit of some of these things. Like let's I'm writing another one in. Calling it high freak because I'm almost certain that the sampler's notch filter doesn't go up nearly as far as the low pass is able to go up. I think it's clamped, it's limited and can't go as high. That's going to be parameter 6. So we're going to patch that right in here. And having done those things, we have a decent chance of working with this and seeing what we get. Clip factor is going to be weird because it's the levels of boosts and things are not going to be the same. That might require a whole other series of adjustments. But I'll get to that. Back into our sound, and also let's open up the phasers example and our high, well, it's not really high bandwidth. Honestly, most of this phaser stuff should be running at 0.5 poles. See, that gets really loud when it goes this far down. There's our 0.5. So now what I need to do is look at this other one. Here's our real sampler. We've got our low frequency very obvious. And here's our other version. Right here, we're cutting off some of the lows. Hear how it's the notch is in the lows and then sweeps up. So if I switched over to this other one and tried to do the same thing with the frequency down here, I'm covering almost the entire range of the control before it does anything. So one of the things that I can tell immediately is that Let's call it power getParam 2, 1 and see where that takes it. Because I can tell right away that's wrong. I was moving the control and I had to move it halfway across the slider before it did what should have been happening at the very bottom edge of the thing. Moving the notch out of where it was sucking away all the bass and into other ranges. Now let's revisit it. Let's also investigate what the high frequency range seems to be like. Because if I open that again, and then we try to find an area where the sweep of it is going up to the top range and cutting out the highs a little bit. Question is how much? It seems to be bright and then sweeps up there and kind of darkens a little without taking too much out. Whereas what I've got at the moment with this one maybe around here. Range goes from around here to here. Or lower. It doesn't feel as if it's going low enough. I'm not getting enough of the extreme lows out of there, and that would be because the low pass that these controls are modeled on isn't designed to sweep down to silence, whereas to make the notch take away those lows would mean having the low pass sweeping down to silence. We need to adjust that too. We can probably put that onto another slider. So we'll quit out of there and get ready to do that. I don't have to worry about the screen being visible because it can't be visible, unfortunately. So I'll just widen my window until I can do all of this quite easily. And use our existing thing with a new parameter. It's going to be parameter 7 this time. And having it turned up all the way will be what we previously had, but I'll also be able to dial it all the way down to DC, or subsonic frequencies. And we can dial in the bottom half of that fader, the slider there. And I'm also very suspicious of this double clip factor. I think we better minimize it a little bit. And I think I can do that by taking 0.1 away from this and I think 0.2 away from that, because we're reducing the amount of intensity with which it's altering. Like the way that this clip factor thing is, it's a gain trim. And as such, it's adjusting the level of gain in order to be able to boost lows, but this is a notch filter, so everything is sort of at the same level of have distortion, and that's going to need some adjusting later, but for now, I'm going to dial it back a little bit and see where I get. And we've now got parameter 7. Not labeled though, I need to label it. Now we can jump in, hear sounds again, because there's nothing for you to see. And open up a reference. It's kind of like Gordon Ramsay telling people to taste stuff constantly. You got to keep listening to the emu. Here's our low frequency. And then we'll give it a try with ZNotch and see where that's taken us. Trying to dial in that lows. I'm not sure about this. Let's try an interesting Q. Let's try a Q of 0.5. Because that's an easy math operation for weak computers to do. We've still got too much boost happening in the lows. Clip factor is too great. Let's just about totally disable it. Doing it this way should be maybe a little bit of a boost, but maybe we don't even... Let's literally disable it and see what we get. If we are able to do that, then technically we have no amplification happening at all unless we want to use it to slightly overdrive. And that's something that we can also do. So let's assume that maybe we want to overdrive between stages to make it gnarlier, seeing as all of this is about getting these gnarly sounds from these old things. The way that is going to be done is parameter 8. And I call it gnarl for the moment, just to remember what it is. And that will be 1 unless it's less. And if it's less, things will become louder because this is clip factor we're working with. So I got a copy a get parameter out here, and instead of using 1, and now that we've got that, let's quickly go and see what we've made. This is another one of those things where I can't set it to 0 or it will blow up, but it's not set to 0. So over to the sound again. Okay, that was loud. Sounds kind of phasery. And that's a good, very raunchy sound. Let's see what we get with a little boost. Let's try a little more boost. So one thing I do know about this is that the real thing is pretty loud. It's not a subtle effect, this. It's peaked out at all times. This is what it really sounds like. And that feels like kind of a broad cue. Like when I go back to mine, if I have a very steep cue, I have another quick change to make. We are going to have pow get parameter param2, comma 2. We are going to have a bit of a logarithmic taper on the slider for the frequency control, because it started out with like way too much play down in the low end before you got anywhere, and now it's got way too much play in the high end. What's causing that to happen is if I have the slider at like 0.5 and I'm doing a power factor on it, it's 0.5 times 0.5, which means that all of the medium range stuff is going to be set to the equivalent of like 0.25 or less. It's going to make smaller numbers. Whereas if I'm not doing the power factor, then the stuff higher in the number range is going to cover more of the area. Like doing more of a power factor on this calculation makes everything hang around in the low frequencies more. And that's relevant because our perception of hearing is also kind of logarithmic. And you don't necessarily want to have a 0 to supersonic control range going at like kilohertz with 0.5 being 5 kilohertz and 1 being like 10 kilohertz. And then if you were trying to dial in subsonic frequencies, they'd all be this tiny little speck at the bottom edge of the control. That's no fun. So you do the power factor to weight things so that the middle of the range is more like middle range frequencies, and you get more control over what you're doing in the bass frequencies. That said, this is true. Now let's go and play with it and do it. And that was the last change that I made. Fine, fine. So I'm going to be trying to figure out what the ranges of these are, and I'm also very interested in what Q factors I'm going to want, because I feel like the original designers probably went for shifting bits if they could, like multiplication factors of 0.5, 0.25, 0.125, and so on. And since that relates to our Q factor, they're not necessarily using perfect Butterworth of 0.7071 if they can do something else, like a 1 or a 0.5 or so, because it'll be more efficient to do it. It'll be easier for them to do it. I can find another fix. Clip factor exists to turn up the bass. I've just disabled it, but I don't want to disable it quite this much. Immediately go back to recode, and we're going to put some of that back again. We're going to have our get parameter param2, and some of that stuff was using really high values. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do 0.1, just a small, or maybe 0.2, because that's closer to what we had before. Quickly build it and then check out this revision. More or less, when I can find something that seems like it needs to be done, I'll often jump on it immediately and do it. Spoke too soon. That was entirely too much. Let's dial it back. Let's do about half of that. Again, it's being made out of param 8, which is just everything boosts. And then this other thing that I'm talking about is giving us more in the low bass. And the whole thing is about making more gain, more distortion as we go. Well, you can't see it coming along nicely, but you can hear it coming along nicely. That's all I can give you today. If I'm lucky, then maybe as soon as next week I'll be able to have the replacement in and be able to show code again. But for now, we're going along anyhow, even with the broken thing. This is actually it with a Q of 0.251, which would technically be more like 0.25. Let's compare it with the real thing. And I've got my poles turned up a lot higher than they need to be. So we're going to assume that phaser 2 has more poles. Yeah, what happened, Periska, is my ATEM Mini finally blew up completely. Like for weeks and weeks now, when I do the coding streaming, it's been flashing and sputtering and making weird colors and stuff. It's been breaking. It's been doing that for a long time. And it finally flamed out so badly that it couldn't even handle a camera, like one camera. And I had to repatch stuff and not have my usual color correction and things going on for my plugin video last week, as in yesterday. Last week counts as yesterday, does it? So the reason that happened is because I had run this ATEM Mini a lot in hot environments or on top of another piece of hardware that heated up. And more than any of that, I had been running it with multiple things patched into it, all of which required rescaling. So the main camera was a high-resolution camera, so it already was going to have to scale down to 1080p. And then I was running the laptop, which you can't see right now. The laptop is coming in at 1280 by 720. So the ATEM had to scale that up to the resolution of the original camera, which is bigger than 1080p, to do the compositing, and then scale that back down again. And at the same time, I also had my Sleepy Circuits Hypno. And that's a fine, wonderful thing. I've enjoyed working with it intensely. But it comes in at something that's not even, I don't think it's even 1080p. But it's not necessarily 720p either. So the ATEM Mini needed to take two separate inputs that were coming in at all times. Like, it wasn't using the Hypno, but that was still plugged in, so it was still having to scale it. And whenever it was running the laptop, it had to scale that. So it was scaling two different inputs up to the size of the camera feed, and then scaling the result down to the size of the HD export. And it just blew up, apparently, and doing color correction on the camera at the same time. So basically, it kind of did it, but it always ran super hot, and it increasingly started to become glitchy and flaky, and then it blew up entirely. If you have one of these, don't do that. Or, which is going to be my next attempt, since the system worked so well until it died, I'm going to get another one and try to do exactly the same thing with it, but give it better cooling. So one of the things I've got here is this is a big heavy piece of aluminum that I had in my basement, and I have bent it into a shape where a ATEM Mini can sit on top of it and the bottom surface will lie on this plane. And I've also got some other stuff coming in, like a cheap laptop cooler that's made out of aluminum and has a fan, and a heatsink designed for sort of power amplifiers. And the end goal is going to be not the little fan, the piece of metal thing, but take the heatsink for power amplifiers, which is larger than the ATEM actually is. Use some thermal pads to sit the replacement ATEM on top of this heatsink, which is a real heatsink with like fins and stuff. It's not very deep, but it's got fins. And the thermal pads will not glue to the ATEM, but it should transfer heat from the bottom of the ATEM fairly effectively to the actual real deal heatsink, which is a really wide surface area as well. And then I set that on top of a laptop cooler, which has a fan built in. So bottom line, I'm going to be just going full tilt bozo to get another ATEM in, but be able to make it so that it can survive. Because it really, I mean, that thing put in a lot of hours before it completely melted and burned up. It's just it's a process of attrition, really. It's like, if I had known, I could have worked on it. I wonder whether maybe I also burned out the fan and that was the beginning of the real end. Because I don't remember feeling any fan motion or hearing any fan inside it. But I don't ever remember hearing it. There is a fan. I took it apart, which means I can't return it. But there's a fan, it's not a good fan. And I was trying to figure out how to help the fan along, but one of the things that might have happened is in the conditions I was using it, it might have just run the fan at full crank until the fan broke, at which point it was just a matter of time before the rest of it melted. If so, when I get a replacement in which doesn't have anything broken yet, I can keep it in working condition just by cooling it a lot better, like a lot better. UA biome. I don't know what UA biome is. Let me get back to my referencing. That should be more poles of filtering. It's about the same though. We'll call it less. So I do keep hearing highs throughout that, no matter what the control does. Whereas when I go to mine, that's more of an effect, that's for sure. With less poles. It feels like my notch is wider than theirs. Yeah, there's Airwindows, Rack Windows did some ports for VCV. I have not gotten into that yet. I've got my hands full with this stuff at the moment, but I've repeatedly considered getting into that too. Meanwhile, since I'm in the middle of this, let's change that Q factor to 0.5 and see. One thing about it, I could use a little more bass and boost on the lows. I need a little more boost on the lows. We're going to go to 0.15 because 2 is too much and 0.1 is too little. And the amount of additional gain we've got in everything seems to be maybe part of the equation. Maybe, well, all we can do is try it out and see if it works. Let's first open the reference. This is what my low Q should be like. Covering a range kind of like that. So if I was trying to make that noise with the notch filter, Let's dial this back just a hair. Too gnarly. So that's still at a Q of 0.5, whereas the real thing sounds like this. So the next thing to do is see whether maybe it sounds right with a Q of 1. That being another easy math equation. That sounds suspiciously like the recording. I got a feeling maybe this phaser thing is about making a steep notch rather than a broad notch. Oh, Faust. First time I met the folks with the surge synthesizer, I went and hung out with them and had an idea for a kind of oscillator based on something that they were talking about or doing. And somebody in their chat went, "Oh, you mean like this?" and coded something up in Faust and showed it to me. And I went, "What the heck is that?" "That's on the web." "How are you doing that?" "That's a thing on the web." And it was. I plugged in a cheap MIDI keyboard into my USB port so that I could play the thing on the web, and started hacking away in the Faust language, which is pretty recognizable. It's like once the guy had written out what something was, I could kind of run with it. And by the time we were done, I had made a really cool and interesting oscillator, which I don't remember anything about what it was now. I probably can go and find it again, though. I think I have a link for that tucked away somewhere. I'm pretty sure I kept it somewhere. I don't think it ended up making it into Surge because they got busy on a million other things, as they do. But yeah, Faust is something you should look into. Faust is being able to program things like oscillators and stuff on the web. Like not compile things and stuff, like program the oscillators and stuff with various sort of building blocks and things that you can run with on the web. And plug a keyboard in and hear the sounds of stuff that you could do. I've never seen anything as convenient as far as being able to do stuff. And I'll tell you one further thing. Surge is going to incorporate the ability to code stuff in Faust and have it imported right into Surge. They're very interested in doing something like that. So look into Faust. It's worth looking into. Meanwhile, Back to our raw hardware. Not exactly the same. But then we're not calling ours phaser, we're calling it notch, because it is actually a notch filter. That's what it's meant to be. So the question becomes, maybe they're doing this phasers by just doing a series of frequencies or something. I'm not really sure what they're up to. Second phaser. So what do we get if we start using this, but more poles? Okay, we're going too loud for one. Faust seems mostly for rapid application development in this. The thing with Faust is playing with ideas and getting sounds that come out. As far as exporting for C++, it's more that in Faust on the web page and stuff, you can just type new things, hit run, and hear what they do really, really, really quick. That's the most important thing, really. You can probably tell by the way I work through this stuff. And I think I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to call this ZNotch. It's not actually going to become an exact duplicate of this, but I'm not going to be calling it an exact duplicate. So we've got that kind of griminess, and by comparison, that is sounding kinda similar. It's definitely a family resemblance. And over here, which is probably a lower number of poles, we have this sort of somehow less resonant quality. And that's pretty much what we've got here. Let's do one last little reference, because I have not tried this for a while. This is back to using a Butterworth cue, 0.707. Maybe that's actually what it would be? You could convince me that that was it, that that was the one. Let's go and reference the other one real quick. This would be more poles of filtering. Whereas mine does this. Hey, David. Interesting. Now let's play with it a little bit and see what it does with cleaner sounds, if that's part of the equation. Unity gain going in. I'm kind of listening to that kick as much as I can. Ah, interesting. More poles, get a little more freaky. And then let's overdrive it just a bit. Dry. Effect. That feels like a decent kick there, because I think the notch filter is handy for stuff like when I record drums. I have a kick drum mic as well as the side mics, and though I probably want the side mics, which what you're hearing, to be fairly clear, I might very well want to take the kick drum mic and sculpt that to some extent. So what I could do is take kind of boxy mid-ranges out of it and affect the kick drum mic in that way. And if I've got it doing this at about 0.5 poles, this is a notch, and I increase the number of poles this is doing, because it's also a distorted Z-style filter. I just brought in a little deeper of a notch. And I've exaggerated it even further. I also hope to be able to use this on electronic kicks. And that just made the kick a lot punchier. And of course I can also distort it like crazy. And get a really aggressive sound out of that. That's huge. Oh, I can't do that, David. It's only a notch filter. See you, Bo. I'm going to be getting going pretty soon, too. Now we're notching out bass frequencies. Now we're notching out super highs. He aims to please. And then the final trick is running it completely dry with the output cranked up all the way and a bunch of gain on the input, and then sneaking in a little bit of wet, enough to hear this kind of grunge. Enough sustain to maximize it. And to do that, you get the sound going, and then just bring in enough of it to accentuate this dry signal without changing it too much. That way we have a fairly similar quality. This is our dry, and then we cut in the ZNotch. Dry, ZNotch. And that's got a sort of a suitable bigness, a suitable intensity to it. Or we can dial everything back. And now we're no longer distorting so much. Dry versus clean but Z-plane filter. I'm going to call that enough. I think we got there a little bit before 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon too, so cool beans. Seeing as this is not a stream where people could see my code, I don't feel inclined to stretch it out super long because it's not as good as the streams where you can't see the code. Z-series is not final badass of the filter stuff. That would probably be whatever I could do with an SP1200, but Z-series is specifically trying to get the Z-plane filter sounds out of the EMU E6400 Ultra, because that being what was asked of me. People wanted me to make sounds like those, or sounds like these, because this is the actual sampler. So when they say they wanted it to do this, they had some good reason for wanting that. Oh, I know it. Not so long ago I got a vinyl record of Paul's Boutique, which is not SP1200, but it's an analogous EMU. I never mix with headphones, never mix with headphones. You get completely fooled. Yeah, the trouble is it's going to be forever before I actually get an SP1200 because they're many thousands of dollars. But it shouldn't be. We'll get there. Eventually we'll get there. So, close out the phasers. Close down the laptop. And yeah, you should be able to get ZNotch this coming Sunday, because the challenges I'm going through with these video feeds and things and not being able to get my video looking right aren't going to slow me down as far as putting out the filters are concerned. Now, once I'm finished doing the Z filters, because I don't have any to follow up after ZNotch, there was no Z filter version of region, so there's not going to be a Z region. Jazz? Surge should do that for you. Surge would do that for you. But you'll have to wait. They're not going to have these right away. To follow this up, I've got a couple of things in mind. And one of the things I want to put some time into over the next couple of weeks is dialing in a experimental distortion plugin where I can have controls for the specific type of gain and clipping that I'm using in these filters. And I don't mean just the hard clip, I mean the McAtee style clip. Because I have to buy a new ATEM Mini, right? This is the raw camera feed. The ATEM Mini lets me do a bunch of color correction stuff, and I like doing that. And the ATEM Mini lets me run the laptop into it and all manner of other things like that. Unfortunately, doing all of that burned mine up. I'm lucky it didn't burst into flames. Remember how in previous streams it's been flaking out and flashing colors? Everything turned to flashing colors. Just a single camera turned to flashing colors. It went completely dead. So one of the things I'm going to be working on is a plugin that lets me dial in more control over that variations on McAtee clipping. Because it's a simple, basic thing that people connecting to me doesn't necessarily help. People connecting to me can just use up more time. Whereas I make these videos and I make myself available on the live streams. I am hoping that by, let's say by 2022, by the new year, I will be back to doing music composition on live streams. I'm kind of getting it together, and then the video switcher dying has distracted me from that. But I've been working on a lot of stuff. Like, you've seen my music slide rule. Oh, the Instagram is gone. It is not there. But what you haven't seen yet is I'm working on the sort of scoring sheets for that card game that I've been developing for composing arrangements. Kind of in the theme of progressive rock, but you could adapt it to anything. And probably what I'm going to be doing, rather than simply doing progressive rock, which is from the 1970s, I'm probably going to basically start a band, call it Tinker Savant, and apply what I know about progressive rock arrangements and chord progressions using all this kind of stuff to electronic music using the synthesizers and modular and stuff. But I'll be writing it up on this. I've got some nice color markers, so it'll be nice and pretty to look at. And I've got a scoring system for this. And I've got a way where you can kind of walk through these things and end up with a series of decisions that you make musical decisions around, and that should produce like decent, listenable, interesting music that, who knows, like some time ago I did that the lyric thing where I used the most common 1,000 words in the English language, or thereabouts, maybe 1,000, 2,000, and compiled them into a rhyming dictionary that's based on the sounds of words rather than just really strict rhymes, just stuff that basically sings about the same, for the purpose of diving into what's been known as melodic math. Like Max Martin and those folks from the Scandinavia, basically getting all those hits with boy bands and having all these specific tricks in mind. I've been studying that. I've been learning how to do it. And it might be interesting and fun to start doing music again and adapting all of these things. The question is just getting down to actually doing them. And the endless series of other things I have to do. So, I do have one fellow who is asking me for just the gate out of channel strip, just the gate out of C strip. That sounds like something that would be nice to do, seeing as I know there's somebody out there who wants it, and it is something that I think I could do. There's also, I was talking about the McAdee style distortions. There's more. I want to take a McAdee style distortion and make it one directional. Make it respond so that on one side it's clipping and the other side it's expanding. Which would mean having to set it up so that it hard clipped on the other side. You can't just make it expand until it makes huge voltage spikes go out. But I think if I have something like that set up to be fairly subtle, and I may or may not need to scale it up or down, that'll add useful, like, second harmonic generation. It'll be the kind of stuff that you get out of your Neve Portico or whatever, those Silk controls that people use. And having that as a basic building block that's easily arrived at and very CPU efficient sounds like it would be useful to be able to fix that stuff up. And then there's somebody who emails me a lot and gets very enthusiastic about stuff, who wanted the rough equivalent of Isotope Trash or something, like Isotope Trash 2. And it's the same thing, like, oh, and this, and this, and at this, and at this, and I never do stuff like that. But what he did not know was that I had made a multiband distortion plugin. And I've not ported it to VST yet. So that might be interesting to do. I don't remember much about it. I don't like that kind of stuff. But, oh no, you probably already have it. Haven't I done that in some of my things like coils? And I feel certain that I had it in a recent plugin of some kind. There's some kind of semi-recent plugin, as in the last 6 months, where there was a sort of Silk effect thing coded in there. So I'm already working on that stuff. I've already got that stuff on. You just have to pay closer attention. But I'm talking about getting the basic building blocks so that I can experiment with them more easily. Like, take a sound and go like, okay, need to emulate this particular thing. Here's a recording of my API. What kind of plugins can I throw in a chain to experiment with and see whether I get in the ballpark by throwing a set of plugins in? And then if I could do that, or supposing, let's say if I was doing a new version of console, but it was meant to sound like some classic retro console, and that had stages, like output stages that were balanced outputs driven by a single-ended tube amplifier stage. And maybe if you use some of these techniques to generate that second harmonic distortion and build that into a console system, that might be interesting. Although it would be, depending upon how you went about it, it might have the same problem as Console 6 did, where throw sawtooth waves at it and it blows up. That's never good. But use just an amplitude, it would probably be fine. As far as sound emulation, use monitoring and the CANs settings. Those are subtle, but they're a kind of delayed crossfeed kind of thing combined with a sort of blur effect, really. It's part of your typical reverb code. It's not a notch filter, it's the other kind. It's the smear filter, what you get when you're not a notch filter. All pass. Yeah, so use monitoring, the monitoring settings marked CANs, use all passes and delay to do a crossfeed so that they are doing that 3D sound emulation thing that you're talking about. Use that. I've already done it. Oh, bro, you're just throwing names around. Channel strip is always going to be a particular theme, but it is not unthinkable to have a channel strip that's based on my biquad filters because those let me get a little steeper. And the interesting thing about that is if you have a filter which has a cutoff and the cutoff, say, is maybe a little bit peaky, you'd have a high frequency cutoff and you'd be building it out of a somewhat resonant low pass. If you assemble things the way the channel strip does, you can assemble them in such a way where flat is still flat. And you only see the slightly resonant peakiness of the filter when you're actually applying it. Like you would get the slightly peaky low pass when you were taking the highs out. Whereas if you were boosting the highs, you'd get kind of the opposite of it. And I feel that that is most likely where it will get to as far as taking examples of old EQs and old things, like your classic old consoles like they did Led Zeppelin on or whatever, and then getting those sounds in the box. Because they're often not going to be just super accurate digital accuracy. The real world filters used in stuff that sounds good and that we like are often a little stranger than that. And you don't necessarily wind up with your perfect non-resonant peaks and dips and so on. You wind up with stuff that really has something of an edge to it. That's what I would be thinking about. You'd have high passes, low frequency cuts, high passes that have a bit of a bump in a certain place. And so you'd set up the biquads and such to most closely correspond to what the sounds are like. So on that note, I'm going to have to call it a day. I'm happy that I got ZNotch done. And wish me luck as far as getting the video system back up. I'm glad that I can do it at all. Thank goodness I ordered that little Razer. If I hadn't ordered the little Razer video capture thingy, then I would be just straight out of luck unless I was just using the camera from the computer. And that'd be very, very cheesy. So, we're going to call that a day. I see what you mean about it looks kind of retro, but what that really means is my lights are not good, and my camera is not using the color corrections that it really needs. So I'm working on fixing it. It'll come back. We'll get all of this stuff. I mean, yay, how I've got ZNotch done now. So ZNotch done now. What that means is that now we've got all the Z plug finished. And this coming Sunday, you shall have ZNotch to download and play around with. And the next time I go and actually try to record music of some kind, I'll be composing it a little bit more because I'll be using, this new stuff that I'm working with. The idea about this is that I've got the card game. If I can develop that, I'll have to sell it because it's a physical object. But I can make these things already downloadable. And like this, the slide rule is already downloadable. And you combine that with this, and then whatever you need as far as setting up the card game, and then you can sort of play the game of progressive music and have it essentially giving you ideas. You would set it up by going like, okay, this is a card game, so we play this in various ways. I deal out some of these cards, and you would go, I want, this says kind full on it. This is a brown color. So this is the basic mood that I want in my song. So I'm going to keep dealing out cards until I have like 4 of these, and then I'm going to kind of construct something based on these connecting together with other things and trying to use them all up. Or here's one over here. Yeah, maybe you want to be kind of more electro. So you go, okay, this is cruel and empty. It's a gray color. And you see that it's possible to connect it to various different things. And you would you would deal out enough cards that you would have a selection of these cruel empty ones to build into a song. And then you would play with making the sequence out of the song using the cards that you had dealt out to yourself, and see how good you could get it. And you'd use you'd use like 3 of the gray cards, because that's the one that you had basically decided that you wanted. And the rest of it would be randomness. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know what other colors it would throw at you, and you'd try to pick among what you had in your hand, and you'd construct something that would be partly random and partly your choice. Because, of course, you could always go like, well, I want to do this, and then I want to do this, and then I want to do this. And if you could do that, why would you be playing a game around it anyway? It's all good. Anyways, we'll talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.